Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're located. Welcome to this episode of Scale School. We've been doing this now for 6 years, and one of the phenomenal aspects of, one of the positive aspects of the COVID crisis is we can actually reach more people in what is sometimes a more convenient way. So this is actually record participation in one of our Scale School events. So without further ado, I should have also said I'm Carl Ulrich. I'm Vice Dean of Entrepreneurship and Innovation and also oversee the San Francisco campus. I'm going to now get out of the way, and I want to introduce our moderator, who will then introduce our panel. Gad Allon is the Jeffrey A. Keswin Professor of Operations, Information, and Decisions. He's also the director of the M&T program at the University of Pennsylvania. He's been a super innovator in remote instruction in this period of the coronavirus. I've learned a tremendous amount from Gad, and it's and he's going to in turn introduce our guests and then lead us in the discussion. I do, before he does that, before I turn it over, I also want to acknowledge Irina Yen, who's the director of Penn Wharton Entrepreneurship, who organized the Scale School, with Allison Grant, who manages many of our events here in San Francisco. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gad. Take it from here.
Thanks, Carl. Again, my name is Gad Allon, and thanks everybody for joining us today. Usually we hold these events in person, but I think there are many advantages of doing these online. One of them is we can keep you and maybe have you more engaged while we are talking here. So rather than waiting with questions, I'll introduce the speakers in a minute. But while we're starting the conversation, if you have any question, you can type the question immediately into the chat box. And what I'll do is, rather than waiting with the question at the end, I may fetch a question, may collate 2 or 3 questions and ask the audience, so we keep things somewhat more engaging rather than divided into conversation than Q&A. The second thing that I would like you to do is click on, if you go into, many of you are probably bigger experts on Zoom than I am, but go to the top right corner and click speaker view, because on the one hand, we would like to have all of you in front of us, but at the same time, you would like probably, as the panel starts, to have the speaker every time in front of you. So if you click speaker rather than gallery, you'll be able to see the speaker in any point in time. And that's essentially it. I want you to know that this is recorded, so it will be posted later on, and it's run in collaboration between Wharton San Francisco and in our lifelong learning group. So really, I think trying to cater to as big audience as we can here. And so just know that any question you have is going to be, everything is recorded here. And with that, let me actually introduce our speakers. The main goal for today is really to talk about the interplay between profit and growth. And specifically to think about how that change may have changed, should change, given the fact that we are now in the middle of a pandemic or a crisis that may end up being a recession, not to say a depression. And so in that, we wanted to have people that bring very different perspectives. So we have Cate from the CEO of Verishop, Joseph Ansanelli, the CEO of Gladly and a partner at Greylock, and Ted Schlein, a partner in Kleiner Perkins. They all have seen crisis before, all have seen that from a very different angle. But before getting into the question, maybe a slightly more detailed introduction for each one of them. So Cate, we'll start with you. Maybe a quick introduction, then Joseph, and then Ted.
Sure. I'm Cate, the Chief Strategy Officer of Verashop and co-founder. My husband is actually the CEO, and we founded the company together. Quickly about what Verashop is. We are an online shopping destination, bringing inspiration, discovery, and the ease of convenience all in one platform. And so our vision is very simple. We want to make shopping fun. And so in the short term to medium term, that means building the largest online shopping mall. So if you think about why you go to a brick and mortar shopping mall, you go there for sometimes shopping and buying, but not always, entertainment, people watching, whatever. But if you go to our app, you can see a feed of content that'll show things like cooking demonstrations and a cat wash-shine and beautiful imagery that it will inspire you. And then if you like what you see, you can click on the post and be able to shop that content or something like that. And so, and we have traditional shopping on our website. But just as a little background, because we are very new, we went to our first trade show and started coding in January of 2019. We live launched by June of 2019. A year later, we launched our social shopping app after we had got the e-commerce fundamentals down. And today we have over 800 brands, or almost 800 brands. We ship 2-day delivery, free shipping, free returns, 24/7 customer care, and our best price guarantee. So while we are very new, we move very quickly.
That's great. Joseph.
I am Joseph. I'm the CEO of Gladly and the co-founder of Gladly. We're an enterprise software company, and we're trying to reinvent customer service to help companies deliver what we like to say is radically personal customer service. Our customers are folks like Warby Parker, Allbirds, Crate and Barrel, REI, and really want to help those types of companies build the kind of relationships and experiences and communications between the company and their customers that we have in our personal lives, and really bring people back to the center of customer service. In addition, I'm also currently a venture partner at Greylock. I was a general partner for many years, and I invest in mostly enterprise software companies. I'm on several boards. Most of my career has been as an entrepreneur. I started my first company when I was actually at Penn. I was an undergrad, graduated a long time ago in 1992. And my first company was bought by Apple. And then went on to start a couple of other companies, one that went public in 1999. So that'll be an interesting conversation in terms of comparisons. And then another company that Symantec acquired in 2008, right before the financial crisis.
That's great. And Ted.
Well, good. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Gad. It's always fun to talk to a bunch of fellow Quakers. So I have been a venture capitalist at Kleiner Perkins for now about 25 years. We mostly invest in very early stage companies, but also do some later stage growth investing as well in both the technology area as well as life science. We've also done some sustainability and green tech and some food tech. During that time, I've had the opportunity to sit on probably over 50 boards or so during my time as a venture capitalist thus far, which means I've seen my share of different situations to try and help companies navigate through. Prior to that, I spent 10 and a half years helping to build a software company as a startup. It was Symantec. I got there, no revenue, and about 40 or 50 people, and left it about 2,200 people and about $500 million in revenue or so. And I guess if Joseph graduated a really long time ago, I graduated a really I'm class of 86, and I have the honor of getting to sit on the board of trustees at Penn, as well as I do sit on the board of overseers of the engineering schools. So I have a lot of ties back to the university, and try and harass Gad and Carl as much as I possibly can. But pleasure to be here.
Thanks, the three of you. I saw that many people joined since we started, so I'll just say to those of you that joined, if you can first of all type your name and location so we have stuff like a better sense of where people are. But also I want to remind everybody, if there is anything that triggers a question, type the question right away. I'll monitor that while people are talking and ask the questions and bring these questions to make them more interactive. But let me go right into the main topic. When I teach my scaling class, one of the most fundamental questions we come back again and again is how to prioritize between growth and profitability. What is the right pace? When should I delay maybe growth, or when should I accelerate growth? And there are many, many rules from Fred Wilson's 40%, and there are many, many things around it. How does the question, or actually, how does the answer change in a time like that? And I'm primarily asking you to maybe reflect to what extent, like if you speak with either your portfolio firms or with your managers or with your suppliers, how should you think about this question in a crisis like that, and reflecting maybe on the previous crisis we've seen in 2008, the bubble burst in 2001. What are the main, how should we think about it differently? And maybe we'll start now with other sequence, so Ted, then Joseph, then Cate.
Well, you know, when to invest. A lot of this has to do with balance sheets. And so, do you have cash and do you have access to capital, or not? And how easy is your access to capital? And how much capital do you have? So really the first thing we end up doing with entrepreneurs is we take a look at the balance sheets and see what capital is available to them. That'll dictate how much you can invest or potentially can invest. And as I say, in different crises, access to capital is very different. I would argue in the pandemic, the access to capital actually has not been that difficult versus 2009, more difficult. And I can tell you in 2000, very difficult. And so the answer to this question is kind of different based upon that. Now, go out another 12 months and maybe it's the capital markets are going to tighten up, and therefore a lot of the advice I give is very much around cash is king, hoard it, and be judicious with it because probably things are going to slow down here in the future. And I'll pause there and let some of the operators here talk about how maybe they're spending their money right now.
Joseph.
So I agree with Ted that you definitely start with your balance sheet and how much cash you have, because that's just or your ability to raise capital. I think the second thing I'll say is, for any of these questions, there's not one rule, and you really need to think about your particular situation. And I'll give an example. So if you're in the travel industry right now, that's a very challenging sector, right? Let's take a publicly traded company, JetBlue, for example, or an airline. They're operating at 10% of their normal capacity. Contrast that to what's going on, and Cate is closer to it than I am, what's happening with respect to e-commerce, where in the past 6 months, we have actually gone through probably 5 years of growth in 6 months in terms of the growth rate. And e-commerce now represents roughly 40% of all commerce sales in the United States. If you're in that space, times like these are opportunities to actually invest and get ahead when you have that tailwind. So it very much depends on sort of, once you figure out how much capital you have or have access to, you have to sort of say, hey, what's our particular situation? And is this an opportunity to actually grow? And you really have to make that decision. And I think the other thing related to this question about the pandemic, I think it's always really powerful to write down your point of view, because you don't know. I don't think hindsight is 20/20, but in 2000 or in 2008 or today, if you go back to March or April, I don't think anyone really knew exactly where we were going to be 6 months later. But you have to take a point of view and say, this is my point of view. So for example, at Gladly, I wrote a 5-page memo to my board and said, here's my point of view. Here's what I think is going to happen. And based on that, here's my investments and decisions that we're going to do in terms of hiring, capacity, building products, sales and marketing, et cetera. And the other thing I'll just add then is every single 90 days, we revisit that and continue to adjust. Like, this is not the kind of thing where you make a decision and you're locked and loaded and you never change it. You have to constantly adjust and be wickedly agile in these types of situations. So that's, I think, to build on Ted's comment, I think that's the way I think about the decisions, whether as a board member or as a CEO.
Cate, similar question.
Yeah, so since the beginning, we are going up against some pretty big competitors who are pretty established. And my background, by the way, is I came from Amazon. And so we had to be focused on providing the best customer service or the best experience for our customers and managing cash flow from the beginning. And I think that hasn't changed with COVID, but may have accelerated some of what we're doing. And so I think about some of our early choices when we really are trying to manage cash flow, things like our technology. We tried to take those things that are pretty standard and use out-of-the-box solutions. So we have a headless Shopify solution. We use Contentful for our content management so that we could use our very sparse technology resources for those things that are really differentiating us, like our Explorer, which is our social shopping app. In our fulfillment area, we had this decision: were we going to build out our fulfillment network and expend the CapEx? And we decided to partner with a dedicated 3PL which provided us the experience of having a control over our customer experience in terms of warehousing, but we didn't have the CapEx that we would have had if we built it ourselves. And so we've made these decisions along the way because we know that we are resource constrained and we had to manage cash flow. Since COVID, one of the things that we changed was we accelerated our asset light model. So we started as a wholesaler where we bought inventory and we took risk on that inventory. But obviously COVID happened and we saw, as Joseph said, this acceleration of people moving online and wanting more selection. And in order for us to afford that, we had to go to models where we didn't have to buy inventory. So we accelerated our dropship capabilities and our marketplace capabilities. And now those two asset light options are 20% of our revenue, even after in only 4 months. And we expect it to be 50% of our revenue by the end of the year or early next year. So choices have changed, but really always been focused on the customer experience and managing cash flow.
Let me actually take you exactly on that point. In fact, very much related to also what Joseph said. But in my scaling class when I teach in San Francisco, which will not happen this year, unfortunately, for obvious reasons, I had one of the core team at Arista. And they tell the story that during the 2008 crisis, basically people came and told them, you have to fire everybody, just keep salespeople and just increase top line. What they ultimately did, they did the opposite. They almost fired all the salespeople and really doubled down on R&D and build capabilities. And when the market came out of that, they were in a much better situation. Now, easy to say, in their case, their funding models was very different. Their cash flow was very different. Their capability. I mean, I'm not trying to make any comparisons here, but the question of building top line versus building capabilities. In a crisis like that, what should be the mindset? And maybe we'll go then this time Joseph, then Cate, then Ted, just trying to mix a little bit.
Again, I think it's very situational. I think it's really hard to, and I don't want to say to everyone here, like, this is what you should do, right? You have to decide what makes sense for you. You know, I'll give an example here just specifically of Gladly. You know, back in March, having been through 2000 and 2008, we started off very cautiously. And, you know, we stopped hiring, we did let go of some people, we, you know, cut expenses where we could, because I didn't know what was going to happen. You know, there was a view that this is going to be a, you know, very long and protracted recession and depression, and there wouldn't really be opportunities to grow. You fast forward 6 months, and the digital transformation that's going on with respect to the shift to e-commerce, and the two sectors that we have sold primarily to were e-commerce and travel. We saw this, and we're experiencing this massive growth with both our existing customers as well as new customers coming in. And then on travel, that business has really just been really challenging. You know, we're doubling down and we're actually increasing investments now, both with respect to product capabilities as well as go to market, because the market's there. And, you know, in our case, you know, we're very fortunate about that. So, you know, if I was in a potentially a different business, that might not be the same answer. So it's just very specific. And, you know, we see opportunities to grow. We've got access to capital, and, you know, we've got a great set of customers. So, you know, today we're actually adding people to the team or increasing investments and continue to go. I think we lost Gad. So I think Cate, yeah, Cate, you know, yeah, this is just we'll just moderate ourselves. It's all good.
You know, I feel like Arista and I might have the same investor, because I think I got the same call, which is first and cut costs to the bone. But we had probably a similar reaction. We went the opposite way too. We've hired over 30% of our workforce since COVID hit, and we probably have doubled down in our R&D. Since COVID hit, we have launched our social commerce app. We've invested in technology to improve our ROAS by 2x. We have integrated with NetSuite to improve our back end. We launched a second warehouse. We've done a number of things to improve our customer experience. And our revenue in second quarter is up almost 50% over first quarter. So we know that these investments have actually helped us. in driving top line growth and profitability improvements.
Yeah, well, we triaged the whole portfolio at the very beginning of all this, and I would sort of say about a third of the companies were hitting headwinds and there was going to be issues. About a third were doing okay, and about a third were benefiting from the fact that everyone was staying home and the situation and growing rapidly. And so, to borrow from Joseph, I think picking and choosing what advice you give and what actions you take very much depends upon each of these. I mean, one of the companies I was on the board of, we had to cut over 20% of the workforce because they, by the way, they ended up being down about 100 million in revenue and ended up being far more profitable than their plan was. So I think they showed themselves they could operate a little bit more efficiently throughout all this coming out of it. And then there's some other companies that are just growing rapidly as can be. And we're just saying, hire as many sales folks as you can, keep going. Now, I actually think this is a great time to hire technical talent. There's a lot of uncertainty going on there. If you think about the kids coming out of school right now, all of them are struggling. They can't, it's so hard to find a job. It used to be if you had a computer science degree, it was a slam, there was, negative unemployment for you. You'd have 3 or 4 jobs. It's tougher now. If you have the ability to hire on the tech side right now, I would do it. I think you can accumulate some great talent that's going to help you in the future. But I stress if you have the ability, and that is a capital requirement. But so I'm not so sure I would fire all my sales reps. I'm not so sure I would just go out and hire 1,000 new engineers and all. But I think trying to figure out what third you're in, and then applying the strategy based upon what third you're in, you come out of this in a much healthier position. Some of these companies have to position themselves to be self-sustaining because they don't know how they're going to access more capital. Well, so be it. And that means we gotta cut to the point that we can generate and positive cash flow. We haven't talked about some of the new IPOs that are coming out on the market. If anyone's bothered looking at those S1s, but I'll see if Gad leads us in that direction or not, because they certainly show that making money is not a very good idea. It is growth at all costs, regardless of anything else, and they'll probably end up getting rewarded for it in this market. So.
But go ahead.
I was just going to add one other thing. I mean, we're talking about scaling. I think the other end of the spectrum is also a question of, is this a great time to start a company? And, Ted's been through the cycle as an investor for many years. Some of the best companies have also been started during these periods. 2008 and 9, Ted will probably add to this list, but, you have Airbnb was started around then. Uber was started around then, and Lyft. And
Facebook's about that area. Yeah.
Facebook was 2005. We invested in Facebook in 2006. So, they went through that period, though, I will say, and it was not clear what was going to happen. So there's just a ton of companies that get started. And so it's like the other side of this coin is, hey, is this a good time to start a company? And again, I think that there are opportunities during these times. And,
this is the scaling class.
I know, but I also want to encourage people to start.
Yeah, you have access to capital. Now there are cheaper rates in marketing than ever before.
Actually, how you spend your money. Right? How you guys spend your money is very different. You no longer have to, the business travel doesn't exist as a line item. Think about how much money is spent on conferences and shows and now you're forced to be quite creative, but it's so much more cost effective in acquiring customers. That's what we're finding. And I think the more interesting thing is, will we ever go back to how it was?
Right.
Pandemic or no pandemic. I think monies have moved possibly forever into new pockets and uses because I think efficiency have been discovered.
But let me actually go directly into that question. In fact, I think let's say that whether you're starting or you're continuing to build something, assuming that we're never coming back to the same behavior as before, how do you scale? Scaling is, to a large extent, is about people. Starting is about people. How do you bring people on board where they're, like, assuming that we have at least to a large extent stay with the same employment model? How do you bring people on board with that, where everybody's going to be distributed?
Cate, do you want to go first,
Yeah,
since you
sure.
hired so many people?
We've onboarded 30% of our workforce during this time. So we've had rapid onboarding, but it comes down to communication. We have to be over communicating everything. We've always had an all hands meeting, and it used to be informal, and we used to have business updates. Now we're very structured. We have team updates. We have team teach-ins, which has been really great, where teams teach the rest of the company a skill set. We've launched a mentorship program. We've launched a buddy program. We have online escape the room and trivia days and happy hours. And so we really have had to figure out how to connect people, because the work is actually not the problem. We hire the best people, we believe, and they know how to drive and they know how to own businesses. And so the work is not the problem. It's how do you stay informed and how do you stay connected? As far as the type of people that we're hiring, we have a workforce that is 50% women and 50% minority, and we're really proud of that. And I think it goes back to, we just hire the best people, and COVID has actually allowed us to break down geographic barriers. And so now that we've gone to this remote,
I think we just lost Cate.
Yeah, I thought so Joe, we'll go with you.
Yeah, obviously hiring has changed a lot. I've hired 2 execs through this process that, I actually haven't even met one of them. She starts next week. And I met her on Zoom, obviously. That's very different. And so we have had to change the way we think about onboarding and getting people to understand what we're about. And I think that there's some things which are tried and true. So you're going to spend time on Zooms, spending time communicating. But probably the biggest thing that we've done is we really have changed our culture to be one where we emphasize writing and reading way more than we ever did before, because the ability to have someone spend time writing a several page document which explains our go-to-market approach, it's something somebody can read, and then the time together is spent much more on discussion. Where I think historically we were kind of lazy. I don't want to say that lazy, I guess is one way to describe it. Like we just say, hey, let's get together and I'll just give you that brain dump, right? And so we've really changed the culture of the company, both with onboarding, but also with everything else we do, to be one where we invest a lot more time and effort into writing and reading. Especially because I think that a lot of what's happened in bringing people on is, the world is way more asynchronous in terms of how we operate. And a lot of that is also due to the fact that when you hire people that have kids, for example, given that we're in this global pandemic, we're giving people much more flexibility in terms of their time and schedule. But this idea of writing things down has really, I think, made us better as a company, but also made the process for people to come on board, when they do come on board, that much better. So that's just one tip to share with everybody.
I see we have Cate back, but just before that, I think an interesting aspect of what you're saying, two interesting aspects. First of all, I think Amazon already for around 10 years is using something similar to that. You come to a meeting with a document, memo, everybody reads, and the discussion starts. There are no decks and slides. The flip side of that is that when you're saying that the world is moving more to an asynchronous world, and that was my sense when all of that started. In fact, I by now taught 5 courses online. In the first course was 80% asynchronous, because I assumed that people would cherish the ability to flexibility. Over time, I moved to 80% synchronous because people cling to these opportunities to meet and speak with other people. I guess it's slightly different in a corporate environment or in a startup environment, but I think the ability at least to balance between these two is something that's going to be, I think, quite prominent in the next few years.
I mean, Gad, I don't think that I don't have a strong point of view that says like the world has moved to a completely asynchronous. I think what's important is to decide what should be asynchronous and what should be synchronous, and what's best done asynchronously. Meaning, hey, you're new, you started, here's a bunch of content to read. Spend your first 2 days really just reading. Then after the 2 days, then you're going to do a ton of synchronous stuff with people. And I think you have to make those investments in those things because we're so distributed today.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Based on how we all adapt. Just as think about what we're doing right now. There's, a lot of people online, Zooming in little cubes. And we went through the point where we all talked about being part of the Brady Bunch or, Hollywood Squares and now, I don't know, I do 10, 15 Zoom calls a day. One right after another, and it's just kind of part of life, whether I'm in Teams, whether I'm in Google Meets, whether I'm in Zoom, doesn't really matter, just kind of flow and everything. And we're very adaptable as society. Since this all started, I have hired and onboarded 2 CEOs that I've never met. I've brought on board 2 different chief revenue officers, 1 vice president of products, and it kind of works. It's all possible. I do think there's this underlying yearning that people want to be with other people, right? I mean, I see it in my own partnership. Look, we've done a lot of investments now online, but we're all starting to talk about, well, maybe we could all get together, once every other week. People want to see one another, physically see one another every so often. I think that camaraderie will come back when it's able to come back. But as Cate started talking about, the ability to break down geographic restrictions, if you will, for hiring, I think is awesome for hiring. I mean, I think it's a great thing. And if people's expense models have changed a lot more, you may be able to afford to pay people more and have them all over the world. And so I think it's potentially quite good for employment as well as wages.
Yeah, that's great. And great point. And Cate, I'll let you finish. But before that, people start writing questions into the chat. I think that's a good reminder. If you have any question, type it. You can type it privately to me, in which case I will not mention your name. We can type it to the entire group, in which case I'll mention the name of the person. And right after Cate's finishing her answers, I'll start reading questions from the chat. So Cate, I think you're starting to talk about how it helped you build diversity. I'll let you finish that thought.
No, I was just saying that we're hiring the best people. I don't think I have anything else to add, but yeah, really proud that even the leadership team is 50% women and 50% minority. That's great.
So a question that came actually in very much related to that is, Joseph, you mentioned documents and that are created. The question here is, can you talk about what the type of document or what has been written to try to help synchronize things, right? Because I think if I'll give a pretext for this question a little bit, the belief is going to be it's going to be easier to hire people in a remote environment, right? And we just discussed that, but might be harder to execute. Can you talk a little bit, and Joseph and maybe other people can add on top of that, what are the type of documents that you're using to try to sync things?
Yeah, I mean, I think even sort of higher level than the documents guide, what I would say is, that I think that this idea of why oftentimes people come to the office is they conflate people's time in the office with outcomes, and they're not the same. And I think that what we try to do in terms of writing things down is also making sure that it's very clear what the outcomes are that we're focused on, not the inputs, if that makes sense. And I think historically, I think that there's been this sense of, hey, if I'm putting in the time, then the outcomes are there. And I just think that one of the key things in a world where, especially because we're all forced to be distributed and remote, a stronger clarity and focus around what's the outcome that we're focused on, and a lot more trust hey, everyone understands what that is, and that you're doing the work necessary to get there. And you don't focus as much on FaceTime, not the technology FaceTime, but FaceTime in the office. It's, hey, we got to do X. Did you do it or not? And there's a lot more clarity. And I think you have to have a lot more clarity around that. And I think in terms of writing, that's probably one of the big things, me as a CEO, that I spend a lot of time, but hey, everyone, like we use OKRs, objectives and key results. And one of our objectives is to really embrace and excel in this distributed culture. And the one way we measure it is we want 100% of the company to understand and be able to articulate what are the company's key results that we're targeting. Like that's a result we measure. And if we're not at 100%, we're not doing our jobs, right? So like those are the kinds of things that as an example, I think is really important as a foundation for writing things down.
That's great. And maybe before we go to the next, I'll just add another question that came from that, because I would love to hear both from Ted and Cate. The question that came here is, what are the main downsides? What are the intangible downsides of moving to a remote? And then by now you've probably been remote probably for like 6 months or so. Cate and maybe then Ted, from seeing like Cate is an operator and Ted from your portfolio firm, what are the first of all, what are the things that help your firm sync, but also what are the main intangible downsides?
I think for me, it is that we have a workforce that signed up for, I have buyers, and it's a very social job. They go to shows and international shows, and they travel a lot across the country. And so they tend to be extroverts, and just the emotional toll this is taking on them, I think is tough. And a lot of times their work life and their personal life is intertwined, and they don't have that social interaction. And so what I worry about is just health of the employees and just keeping them connected. And we've done as much as we can remotely, but there are just some things you can't replicate.
Yeah, Ted.
Yeah, there's a reason I think people like to break bread together. You get to know people in a different situation rather than in a little square digital box. My business is a people business. Most businesses are people businesses at the end of the day. And especially when you're trying to help an entrepreneur or court an entrepreneur or work with a team, to not actually get to know them in different settings, I think is a challenge. I think it's a challenge, and I think it's not one that's easy to overcome. Obviously, I think we're trying to make up for it as best as possible. But I don't hope that this is how we operate going forward. I've just been impressed with the adaptation that people have been able to do to operate in this environment.
Yeah.
And just to build on it, I think the biggest thing in terms of connection that it's been hard, the hardest thing has been the creative interactions that happen. So for example, design. There's nothing that we have not figured out how to replace 5 really creative people sitting in a room with a whiteboard doing, version X of the product UI remotely. Like that's probably one of the places that's been most challenging. It's just, there's nothing about that. I have not figured out how to replicate that creative process that happens where we're all sharing something in a way that's very visual. Like that's been one of the biggest downsides in terms of the innovation cycle. And I think the second thing I'll say, which is very specific to the pandemic, is from a downside right now, is parents of kids. The stress we're seeing with our team, parents who kids are working from home, like we have an hour-and-a-half session this afternoon with the company where we're just bringing all the parents together to talk about the challenges and how we can best support them through that. Because, with schools being closed, especially when you have young children, let's say between the ages of, newborns to early teenagers, you can't just sit them in a room and be like, hey, hang out on Zoom for 8 hours and go to school. Like it just doesn't work. And I think that the stress from that is, like, in terms of a downside that we're dealing with, which is, I think, very pandemic specific, is really big, and it's not talked about enough.
I'm glad you brought that one up, Joseph. With different people at different stages in their lives, dealing with different things. It's very easy for me to squirrel myself away in my house, in my office here. I got a nice house. I got a place I can wander around. My kids are long gone, but I cannot imagine if I had a bunch of young kids that I'm home with. I'm trying to take care of your family first. Yet you're working on a job and everything. That is just, and you thought that was going to be like a temporary thing. Okay, I'll live with this for 8 weeks, but I'll get through it. And now, we're so many months into this with not exactly knowing when it's going to really end. I think that takes quite the toll, and something that we're going to have to watch out for as a society in general. So thanks for bringing that up.
I think it's a great point. And overall, I would say sensing distress over in a distributed setting is much harder, right? Like to know when someone is not doing well is much, much, much harder than in an environment where you see the person and you know how they behave, and you have much more of a 360 idea of where they are, parents or otherwise. I mean, even with the younger employees. Let me take the discussion a little bit different direction, and there are additional questions on the topic of people, but I'm interested in stuff like there's another question here that came from Kevin Shea, asking, many of the firms, in fact, expand globally. And in fact, Joseph, we met a few years ago on a flight to London, sitting near each other.
Right behind you. I was like small world.
Exactly. And that doesn't happen now, or at least definitely not as often. Like sometimes you can replace that, of course, but some of these things cannot be replaced. What do you think are the long-term implications of that? So we'll start with you, Joe, and then we'll go, Joseph, then we'll go with maybe Ted and Cate.
I mean, from an investment standpoint, I think Ted's comment about, so much of an investment is about people. And I do think that it's much harder to get to know people and break bread and understand who they are and, sort of get beyond their LinkedIn profile. Like that's really hard. I think on the flip side, in terms of running a company, historically, I've always told companies or companies that I've run, I've always said, like, be very focused on in a particular geographic area doing enterprise software sales. So we were always very focused on the US. And what's interesting is we've kind of had to learn how to do things remotely with companies in the US that were actually doing international expansion earlier than we probably normally would have, partially because also the customers are comfortable with it. So for example, we go and we train all these customer support people on how to use our software. And, historically when we got 2,000 people at JetBlue live, we were there for like 3 weeks and we were on site training them. But, we went live with Crate and Barrel with 800 customer support people, and it was all on Zoom, and it was great. So now we're like expanding to Europe, we're expanding into other geographies that we probably wouldn't have done actually otherwise. So it's actually been a benefit, to be honest, despite the fact we can't get on airplanes, because people are more comfortable with working that way.
Ted, what do you see from your firms?
I mean, look, serendipity is hard to replace. You don't plan it. And I was having this conversation with somebody actually this weekend about we talked about kind of some of the upsides of not going to conferences anymore, which is you don't have to go to conferences, the cost, all that. But some of the downsides is you run into people that you hadn't seen in a long time, and how do you and that leads to something. You don't know what it's going to lead to. It might just rekindle a relationship. It just might remind you of a business opportunity or what. And those are things that are just really hard to replace ultimately. So I don't have a great answer as to, I just think that's going to work its way back into our society here when it works its way back in, and people feel a little safer about that, because as I said, I think it's quite hard to replace. I also think it's why people want to go into the office. The water cooler conversation, if you will, to borrow the phrase, don't happen. Everything's so planned, it's so structured. I know when my next Zoom call is. I know who's going to be on it. Versus the real world, where you don't know what's going to be happening. And I don't think there's a great answer for replacement. To a comment that Joseph said, I do see our companies expanding quicker than they used to. We used to I used to be kind of hardcore on, let's get to $15-20 million in US revenue before we go anywhere else. And that usually was because it's complicated to geographically disperse. You got to build it. Everyone says, oh, we're just going to open an office there. Oh, you have no idea. You're going to really just open an office there. And then you got to staff that office. You don't have to do that now. And so I think it gives you the ability to kind of branch out quicker and at least test those waters, see whether you're any good at that international expansion than we used to do it.
So Cate, I mean, you're in an earlier stage potentially, but think about expansion in that sort of like because in many ways, I think I would say in e-commerce, I think the US surprisingly is much more behind compared to other countries, definitely the UK and China, for example. How does that influence you?
So what influenced me? I couldn't hear the last part.
So to what extent COVID changed your expansion plans, in at least when it comes to globally?
Yeah, so I mean, because we're so early, we hadn't planned on going global quite yet. Our roadmap is really focused on the US right now. So it hasn't affected those plans. But I would say that our R&D plans have really accelerated because we want to penetrate into the US even faster now.
A question that emerged, or two questions, in fact, more than one, are referencing some earlier discussion we had on IPOs. And not all of that is, of course, COVID-related. Some of that is COVID-related. But I think, can you talk about, I mean, I think you made a comment earlier on the fact that, or at least the main question here is, one of the questions was, the fact that it takes so much longer now to IPO, how does that affect the decision between being acquired to an IPO or this new thing called a SPAC? I'm not sure if you saw, there is a pen SPAC now. If you want to enroll, you can enroll in it. But more seriously, I think this discussion on profit versus growth, you see such a high premium for growth versus profitability. How all of that pan out into this environment? So Ted, well, since you made the comment, start with you and then Joe.
I'm happy. I'll go into SPACs too if you want. I have an opinion about those too. But it gets back to kind of the very first comment I said. If you have access to the capital, which all these companies you're seeing go public had unbridled access to as much capital as they humanly wanted at increasingly larger prices, so it wasn't too dilutive. I mean, the capital wasn't that expensive, and they spent it and they grew their top line and they're going to be rewarded for it. Go look at any none of those income statements would make any sense to anybody for the most part anywhere other than tech investors in the public market. Where we love companies that are growing at 30 to 70% annually, and don't care too much if their revenue line is 300 million and they happen to be losing 400 million. Because one, we do have enough evidence that shows that in tech companies, because the margin structures for the most part are so good, we can make money, but they will eventually turn profitable. And there's enough history that shows that most of them do turn profitable, not all, but most of them do get to profitability. And so therefore people are willing to invest in that growth. And so you could argue it teaches really bad habits because there's not a great reason to be fiscally responsible in a way. But it's been going on now for a long enough period of time that people have been rewarded for it enough that I don't think those habits are going to go away anytime soon. And maybe those bad habits are actually the good habits. What we used to see as a bad habit. So on the SPACs, beware the SPAC. I've seen them before. If you can't go public on your own, I'm not exactly sure why you think you should be public via a SPAC. You're public. So make sure you're prepared to be a public entity if that's how you're raising your capital. Remember it's just an IPO is a capital raising experience, a SPAC is a capital raising experience. So I could go on for a long time. So I'll pause and let others chime in.
So do you have a perspective on that, on the question of IPOs?
Well, I'm on the board of one of those companies that's currently on file. And so I probably shouldn't comment too much about the public market situation right now, and currently on the roadshow. So, but I think this question of growth versus profitability, I think, Ted's comment to just build on that is, I think for enterprise software companies and recurring revenue business models, I think that, historical accounting tools like a balance sheet and an income statement and cash flow, they really are a moment in time. And I think for companies where you have high customer retention rates, potentially expanding revenue per customer, and a lifetime value that's beyond a single transaction, it's much easier to make a decision to say, hey, we're going to grow because I know that this dollar that I bring in today that might not actually be gross margin profitable in the next 12 months, but because I'm going to keep this customer for 3 to 5 years, it's wildly profitable to do that. So the income statement says, hey, this doesn't look like a good business, but the underlying metrics, because of that retention, make it so that, hey, this is a great business to be in because, yeah, it costs me $1 to get $1 today, but that dollar is going to repeat for like 5 times over the next 5 years at software gross margins of 70 to 80%. Like, you should like, that's an arbitrage opportunity. You should be making that investment. And that's what many people are doing. Now, there's a flip side to that. And Ted will remember this from the .com days. There's this company called pets.com that was shipping, 10-pound bags of, pet food that in 2000 did not work because the unit economics of shipping that dog food didn't work. But, fast forward today, you got, things like Chewy where like now distribution makes sense. You can and make those investments. So you have to understand, like, you have to look beyond the income statement to understand the fundamentals of the value of $1 to make that decision. And I think that's the key thing that I think traditional accounting tools like an income statement, et cetera, don't give you that detail of why it makes sense to grow and why people are actually valuing the companies the way they are.
Yeah,
Agreed. Gad, are you still with us?
I think we lost Gad.
Kate, did anything here?
I think that we're in a different situation where we launched as an e-commerce company. And so the multiples that we would get are a little bit different than a tech company. However, we've always believed that we are a tech company and we are not sharing our longer term roadmap. And so that was harder for investors to see in very early years. And so we're being compared to people like Casper, who didn't have a fantastic IPO. And so what we're really heads down in is really not focused on the public market right now. Obviously, it's too early for us, but really shaping up our long-term strategy so that we can, so that investors see our true technology company as a technology company.
Yeah, and Kate, my guess is that, the comparison to Casper, like going back to the conversation about repeatability, in your business, you've got thousands and thousands of merchants. The value is you get someone as a customer, there's a lifetime value I'm sure that you're putting on them that says like, yeah, they spent $100 with you to buy X, but like, can I get them to then do 5 more repeat purchases? I mean, your model works for that. And like the Casper one is an example on the flip side. And we were not investors in Casper. It's a good company. I give them a ton of credit. They've scaled and built. I mean, they built a really big business. I mean, yes, their IPO didn't necessarily go the way they wanted it to in terms of the pricing, but for you, that repeatability and sustainability of revenue is I'm sure a key metric.
Exactly. I mean, what we have, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sales were down over 50% as a macro trend. And we were diversified into other categories like home and beauty and wellness. And that really propped up our sales. Like I said, we were up almost 50% quarter over quarter in a time when the largest category that we were selling was down 50%. And so really trying to be a lifestyle brand followed that's based in technology. And also because of the direction that we're going, we don't necessarily have to have everyone shop every time. We're a commerce platform, a social commerce platform. And so we want people to come and be engaged. Just like a mall, you want that foot traffic and that habit of coming to you when you are looking for entertainment or for looking for something else to do. And then if you shop, that's also a bonus. And we're probably the place that you would be more inclined to shop if you were to fill your time.
That's great. And we don't have much more time, but I would love to ask one last question, maybe one sentence from each one of you. Someone that is going through a crisis like that for the first time, first-time entrepreneurs. All of you have been here for a while, have either worked for a bigger firm, but have gone through crisis before. One sentence of what would you say to a first-time entrepreneur going through that and panicking that they just didn't raise enough, they don't know, they've never, what would you say? Ted, then Joseph, then Cate.
Beware debt. How's that? If I come up with debt, don't confuse debt and equity. So I've seen entrepreneurs get excited because their banks are willing to give them a bunch of debt. The rules around debt are just so dramatically different than equity. So if you're using debt to finance your operations while you're losing a lot of money or going into an area of unsurety, that can be quite dangerous. So that'd be my 2 cents to you.
Perfect. Joseph.
I think the key is what I describe as agile decision-making, which is make a decision, but still maintain agility as you learn more stuff. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that I have seen people make when they're going through this the first time is they freeze. And freezing is probably the worst thing you can do. It's always better to make a decision and continue to move and adjust very quickly. And I think that's like in these environments, we don't know what the future holds. That's the only thing you can do.
All right, Cate.
Yeah, I would say stick with your vision. And so, the road may be longer and you may have to change your strategy, but stick to your vision and see the North Star and still go forward.
That vision, agility, Joseph, Ted, and Cate, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We recorded that and the recording will be online. Again, thanks everybody, and thanks for Wharton Executive Education, Executive MBA, and Lifelong Learning for hosting us. Thanks everybody.